The following examples will show you how to find the difference quotient of certain functions. And in this particular part, we're going to focus on linear and quadratic functions. But you can find the difference quotient of any function. And in pre-calculus or in calculus as well, the difference quotient does mean something. In a previous lesson in this course, you learned about where the difference quotient came from, how we derived the difference quotient. But just keep in mind that the difference quotient, it measures the slope of a secant line. And that's going to be important if you take calculus next semester or the semester after that. Okay, so let's go ahead and find the difference quotient. So remember, there's a formula for a difference quotient, and it's this. And we're going to go ahead and use the notation f of x for our function. But you can use g of x, h of x, whatever notation it is, but we're going to use f of x. Since I'm using the notation f of x, I'm going to go ahead and use f in the formula. So it's f of x plus h minus f of x. All of that is being divided by h. So that's the difference quotient. Okay, so notice the word difference, and that's a subtraction. So that's where the difference comes from. And quotient is the division. Okay, so difference quotient. All right, so let's go ahead and do an example. So for example, we're going to find the difference quotient of the first example. So let's say we had f of x is equal to 5x minus 7. So f of x equals 5x minus 7. So again, we're going to be dealing with the linear or quadratic functions in this case, but you can find the difference quotient for any function. All right, number one, we have f of x equal 5x minus 7. Now, there are a couple ways you can do this. So either approach is fine when you do when you do these problems on a worksheet or a test or a quiz. But remember, work is necessary. So the work needs to be like one of these two approaches. All right, so the first approach is this. So the first approach is to look at this in terms of steps. So step one is we're going to find that first part of the numerator. So step one is to find f of x plus h. So that's step one. And so let's go ahead and find what f of x plus h is. So remember, to find f of x plus h, I go to my function f. See, this is f. I go to my function f, and wherever I see the variable, I only see it here, I substitute x plus h. So I get 5 times, in place of x, I'm going to substitute x plus h, and then minus 7. And then let's go ahead and distribute, get rid of the parentheses. I get 5x plus 5h minus 7. So that's your step one. Okay? Step two. All right, do it in steps. A lot of students like to do this in steps because it breaks it down what they need to do. So step two is to now subtract f of x from what you just found. So step two says, let's go ahead and find that numerator. So step two will be find f of x plus h minus f of x. All right, so I already found this part, right? That's step one. So that's this. I'm going to rewrite this. So 5x plus 5h minus 7, and then I'm going to subtract f of x. Now, it's very important you notice that f of x is more than one term. So you have to put that in parentheses because you're subtracting both 5x and a negative 7. All right, so let's go ahead and get rid of the parentheses. So we're going to distribute. And so I get 5x plus 5h minus 7 minus 5x, and then the opposite of a negative 7 is a positive 7. It is at this point, now we're dealing with polynomials here, so it's at this point where every term that doesn't have a factor of h will cancel out. So for example, this 5x does not have a factor of h. You don't see any h in there. So 5x and negative 5x cancel out. This has a factor of h, so it stays. Now when I say it stays, there's no, its opposite is not located anywhere. This does not have a factor of h, and you see its opposite. So negative 7 and a positive 7 is 0. So the only thing you have left, I'm putting equal signs here, the only thing you have left is 5h. So that's step 2. So you found step 2. But remember, at step 2, we're dealing with polynomials. In this case, it's a linear function. In step 2, when you get to this point, every term that does not have a factor of h will cancel out. Its opposite will be located, will be there as well. All right, and then finally, step 3 is you take what you just did and divide it by h. So step 3, well, you're going to say f of x plus h minus f of x. All that's being divided by h. And so you just found the numerator. The numerator is at step 2, right? This part is step 2. So that's 5h. You're going to divide that by h and then reduce. The h's divide out, and you get 5. So the answer, so you found your answer. So the answer, the difference quotient for f of x, for this function right here, is just equal to 5. All right, that's all you do. So notice I did this using steps. Step 1 is to find the first part. Step 2 is to find the numerator. And then step 3 is once you find the numerator, which is step 2, divided by h. All right. Now let's go ahead and do that same problem, but another way that some students will do it. So some students will not do it in steps, and that's fine. Just make sure whatever you write is mathematically correct. All right, so notice this is the work you have to show. All right, so make sure you show that work. So here's that same problem. Here's that same problem. And so we're going to do it another way. So the other way is to actually just do everything you see here. So the other way is to actually take all of this and put it into one problem, and then you just simplify as you go. So watch how that's going to look. So remember the difference quotient. So you want to find f of x plus h minus f of x, all divided by h. So here's the work. All right, so you're gonna do everything you see here. So you're gonna write f of x plus h. So this part here becomes 5 times x plus h minus 7. Then you're going to subtract f of x, which is this part here, 5x minus 7, your function. All that is being divided by h. So see, for some students, they prefer doing it this way because it breaks it down into steps. They don't like this because it kind of puts everything together like this. So it's kind of a little confusing the way it looks to them. To be honest with you, sometimes I prefer doing it this way than that way, depending on the function. All right, now remember though, if you're going to do it this way, you must say divide by h. That's important. If you don't say divide by h, mathematically that's not correct. You must say divide by h because that says divide by h. So if you don't do that part, you're going to lose some points and you're not going to be very happy, okay? So mathematically, write everything that's supposed to be mathematically correct. Everything you write down should be mathematically correct. All right, and then we're going to go ahead and distribute. So we're going to get 5. So we're going to distribute here and then distribute the negative symbol there. So 5 times x is 5x. 5 times h is 5h minus 7. And then the opposite of 5x becomes negative 5x. The opposite of negative 7 becomes positive 7. All divided by h. Don't forget to divide by h. Equal. Now let's go ahead and combine like terms. So remember, at this point, every term that does not have a factor of h will cancel out. So you have 5h divided by h. So make sure you write that. Look at how the steps are. That's how you need to write them. Like this, like this, like this. And then these divide out, and you get the answer of 5. Okay? So you get the same answer. This is a little bit more strategic in terms of steps. So step 1, step 2, step 3. And compared to that one. Okay? All right, so that's number 1. Let's look at a quadratic one. So let's look at number 2. So number 2, let's suppose we had this example. Let's suppose we had f of x is equal to 5x squared minus 7x minus 8. So 5x squared minus 7x minus 8. So I'm going to do it in steps first, and then we'll do it the other way. Okay, so let's do it in steps. So remember our difference quotient. Difference quotient is f of x plus h minus f of x. All of that being divided by h. So if you do it in steps, step 1 is to find this first part that's in the numerator. So step 1, find f of x plus h. So I'll go to my function f, and wherever I see the variable, I see it twice, I'm going to substitute x plus h. So I get 5 times x plus h squared minus 7 times x plus h minus 8. Then I got to get rid of those parentheses. Now that's where you're going to, whenever you do a quadratic, that's where it's a little bit more work. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and do it down here. So remember, we're supposed to find this part here. So x plus h squared. So let's go ahead and put that right here. Let's see what that means. So x plus h squared means x plus h times x plus h, right? So let's FOIL this out. So first, x times x is x squared. The outer is a positive xh. The inner, h times x, is also xh. And the last, h times h, is h squared. Combining like terms, I get x squared plus 2xh, and then plus h squared. So that part goes here. Okay, so now this becomes 5 times x squared plus 2xh plus h squared. And then let's go ahead and distribute here. So I get minus 7x minus 7h minus 8. Now let's go ahead and distribute the 5. I get 5x squared plus 5 times 2xh is 10xh. 5 times h squared is plus 5h squared minus 7x minus 7h minus 8. All right, so that is step 1. All right, so notice that whenever you have a quadratic, you're always going to be squaring x plus h. So remember, x plus h will always be this right here. So you're not going to remember this. At some point, you'll be able to look at it and know what it is, but if you try and memorize, it's not going to happen. So actually go ahead and work it out. All right, that's just step 1. Now step 2. So remember, step 2 is where you take what you just found and subtract your function from it. So step 2 is to find f of x plus h, find f of x plus h minus f of x. Well, you just found f of x plus h, right? So that's all of this. So let's go ahead and write all of that. 5x squared plus 10xh plus 5h squared minus 7x minus 7h minus 8. And then subtract, in parentheses, you're subtracting all of this function right here, all of those terms. So that becomes, in parentheses, 5x squared minus 7x minus 8. Now let's go ahead and get rid of the parentheses, so distribute. I get 5x squared plus 10xh plus 5h squared minus 7x minus 7h minus 8. And then the opposite of 5x squared, so minus 5x squared. The opposite of a negative 7x is a positive 7x. And the opposite of a negative 8 is a positive 8. Now remember, if everything you did was correct, even here, okay, if all you did was correct, if everything you did was correct, then every term that doesn't have a factor of h, its opposite better be located. So you see 5x squared minus 5x squared. That has a factor of h. That has a factor of h. In fact, it has 2 of them. That does not. Negative 7x squared, positive 7x squared. That has a factor of h. This does not. A negative 8, positive 8. And what you have left is this. So you have 10xh plus 5h squared minus 7h, right? All right, so that's what you have left. Now, what I would do at this point, because remember, you're going to divide it by h, right? So what I would do at this point is notice that all of these terms have an h in common. So let's go ahead and factor out the h at this point. So we get h times 10x plus 5h minus 7. All right, so all I did was factor out an h. And the reason I did that here is because the next step, we're going to divide by h, and those h's divide out. So step 3 is now to find the difference quotient. F of x plus h minus f of x, all divided by h. And I found the numerator, right? Here's the numerator right here. There's the numerator. So I get h times 10x plus 5h minus 7, all divided by h. At that point, the h's divide out. You see why I factor out an h? Because that's going to divide out with that one. And I get the answer to be this right here, 10x plus 5h minus 7. So there's the answer. So the difference quotient is this. All right. So the difference quotient for that function that we're looking at right here is this. This does mean something. When you take business calculus or calculus, regular calculus, you're going to see that this does make sense. This does mean something in that course. All right. So that is number 2. So notice the steps. Step 1, step 2, step 3. All right. Now let's do that same problem, but let's go ahead and instead of doing it by steps, let's go ahead and put it all in here. Now remember, most students on a test will do it in steps because it breaks it down for them. Some students won't, but if you don't, you need to make sure that at every step you say divide by h. There are some students that do that second approach and they forget to divide by h at each step and they don't get all their points. All right, because remember, everything you write down has to be mathematically correct. All right, so let's do number 2 again, except this time we're going to just go ahead and put everything together at once. All right, so remember, that was my function, and that was the difference quotient right here. And let's go ahead and find the difference quotient. So that's going to equal. So remember what this first part means. This first part here means I go to my function, and wherever we see the variable x, I substitute x plus h. So here's if you're going to do it this way, here's what that first part should look like. So you better write 5 times x plus h squared minus 7 times x plus h minus 8. So this part right here is this. Then you got to subtract your function. So then you got to say minus f of x, which is this quadratic expression. So 5x squared minus 7x minus 8. So that's this right here. All of that, though, so as I'm saying, you better say divide by h. Okay? All right, so now you got to do some work again. So you got to figure out what this is, which you already know, right? So remember, x plus h, and we already did that, x plus h squared, when you work it out, is going to be x squared plus 2xh plus h squared. All right, so that becomes 5 times x squared plus 2xh plus h squared. And then let's go ahead and distribute here. So I get minus 7x minus 7h minus 8. And then let's go ahead and distribute here. You're going to get minus 5x squared. The opposite of a negative 7x is a positive 7x. The opposite of a negative 8 is a positive 8. All of that is being divided by h. So don't forget, you must say divide by h. Equal. Now let's go ahead and distribute. So I get 5x squared. 5 times 2xh is 10xh. 5 times h squared is 5h squared. And let's go ahead and write everything else over. Minus 7x, minus 7h, minus 8, minus 5x squared, plus 7x, plus 8. All of that is being divided by h. Now remember, at this point, that's where every term that does not have a factor of h, its opposite better be located. All right, so its opposite here better be located somewhere. So 5x squared, negative 5x squared. That has an h, that has a factor of h, that does not. Negative 7x, positive 7x. Negative 8, positive 8. And all you have left is these 3 terms, right? This term, this term, this term. Notice they both have at least one factor of h. So let's go ahead and write it out first. So you have 10xh plus 5h squared minus 7h, all divided by h. So let's go ahead and factor out an h. So I get h times 10x plus 5h minus 7, all divided by h. The h's divide out, and here is your answer. 10x plus 5h minus 7. Okay? All right. So either approach, when you do the worksheet or the test, either one of these is fine. Notice it has to be mathematically correct. All right, and your steps have to be shown. And same thing here, step 1, step 2, step 3. Okay? All right, let's do one more. Let's do another quadratic. So let's look at number 3. Now in that one, in number 3, I'm just going to do it that one approach by just using those steps. So let's look at number 3. So number 3, let's suppose we had f of x is equal to negative 6x squared, let's say plus 8x. All right, so it's negative 6x squared plus 8x. All right, now remember, on your test or quiz, the function will be quadratic. To let you know now, it will probably be quadratic. Okay, so let's go ahead and find the difference quotient. So f of x plus h minus f of x, all divided by h. All right, so remember, we're just focusing on linear quadratic functions, but you can find the difference quotient of any function. It could be a rational function. Um, you could find the difference quotient of any polynomial function and so forth. All right, it could be a radical function, but we're going to focus on linear and quadratic. All right, so step 1, let's go ahead and find the first part, f of x plus h. So I know how to do that. So that says I go to my function. Where we see the variable x, I substitute x plus h. So I get negative 6 times x plus h squared plus 8 times x plus h, right? All right, so let's go ahead and get rid of that parentheses here. So remember, you got to square first before you multiply by negative 6. All right, so be careful, order of operations. But we all know how to figure out x plus h squared. So x plus h squared means x plus h times x plus h, right? So if I FOIL, I get x times x is x squared. The outer is xh. The inner is also an xh. And the last is h squared. When I combine like terms, that's x squared plus 2xh plus h squared. But notice that's the same as the previous problem. So at some point, you won't have to do this anymore because you already know. You could look at this and know that when I square x plus h, this is what I get, right? Okay, so this becomes negative 6 times x squared plus 2xh plus h squared. And let's go ahead and distribute the 8. So plus 8x plus 8h, right? Now let's go ahead and distribute the negative 6. When I do that, I get negative 6x squared. A negative 6 times 2xh is a negative 12xh. A negative 6 times h squared is a negative 6h squared. And then plus 8x plus 8h. All right, so that's your step 1. Step 2. So step 2 is is the numerator. So step 2 is this minus this. So f of x plus h minus f of x. Now I already found x plus h, right? That's a step 1. So that's going to be negative 6x squared minus 12xh minus 6h squared plus 8x plus 8h, and then minus the function. And so in parentheses, make sure you put that in parentheses. So here's your function. So negative 6x squared plus 8x. Now get rid of that parentheses, distribute the negative, or take the opposite of each term. I get negative 6x squared minus 12xh minus 6h squared plus 8x plus 8h. And then the opposite of a negative 6x squared is a positive 6x squared. The opposite of a positive 8x is a negative 8x. It is at this point that if you did all this work correct, at this point, the terms that does not have a factor of h, its opposite better be located. Negative 6x squared, positive 6x squared. That has an h, that has an h, this is not. Positive 8x, negative 8x, and that has an h. And so what you're left with is negative 12xh minus 6h squared plus 8h. Now remember, at this point, this is what I would do. Since I'm dividing by h next, I would go ahead and factor out an h. So I get h times negative 12x minus 6h plus 8. And then finally, step 3, which will be your answer. So the difference quotient, f of x plus h minus f of x, all divided by h, is going to equal this. So that's your numerator, right? Step 2 was your numerator. H times negative 12x minus 6h plus 8. All of that divided by h. The h's divide out, and you're left with the answer. So your answer is negative 12x minus 6h plus 8. Okay? All right, so that's the difference quotient for our function. Now remember, that does mean something. So if you take business calculus or calculus, this slope of the secant line does mean something in those courses. All right, so that is how you find the difference quotient of a linear function and a quadratic function. And if you were to find the difference quotient of other type of functions, you would do the same thing. Step 1, step 2, step 3, and so on. Okay? All right, so that will be the end of these examples.